When bad things happen, God usually gets the blame. God, Where Were You When? Addresses real issues, exposes injustices, finds answers and solutions, and provides hope. It features victims, experts, and a biblical perspective. Whether the need is prevention or intervention, listeners will be better informed about serious matters that bring many of us to ask, God, where are you? Through each broadcast, we want to instill hope and the confidence that healing is attainable. And now, here's your host, Sherrie Clark, former New York City police officer, licensed clinical Christian counselor, and author of the award-winning book, Small Voices Silent.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. Whether it's live or it's the archive, this is a show that I believe is going to help so many parents out there because it is a show about something parents, I think it's the worst thing that can happen to a parent, and that is when they lose a child. And many times they're asking, God, where are you? And our guest that's on today, Rosilyn Spencer, she will tell you because she lost her son to a terminal illness, leukemia, and she knows exactly where God was, and she's going to share that. So this is going to be a show that's going to make you cry, it's going to make you smile, it's going to inspire you, give you hope. This show, again, is going to inspire you, and it's going to give you courage, because several years ago, when Rosilyn Spencer lost her son, Tony, at the age of 11, to leukemia, she experienced a lot, and it was a lot of supernatural. And I'm hoping that those parents who've lost a child or those who are in the midst of facing that possibility will listen, because I think it's going to give you some hope and it's going to give you some inspiration. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about our guest, Rosilyn Spencer. She possesses a bachelor's degree in psychology from University of North Florida. She's also a practicing licensed cosmetologist and has been for the past 15 years. She's 3 lovely daughters, Erica, Raylan, and Lori, and 1 son, Tony, who is in heaven awaiting her arrival. She's currently an employee with Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, where she works as an employment specialist at the Jacksonville Reentry Center. She's been a member at New Covenant Ministries, off and on, for the past 20 years. She's also affiliated with Ward Women in God's House. Her passion is ministering to lost souls. Welcome, Rosilyn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Now, you lost your son, your only son, your beloved son, to leukemia. How long ago was this, and then when and how did you find out about Tony's illness?
Okay, Tony went to be with Jesus June 16th, 1986. And how I found out was Tony wanted to play football. And he got ill with throat. And I took him to the doctor. It was right around November of 1984. I took him to the doctor, and they said it was the worst case of throat they had seen. I took him to the clinic at first, and they gave him this ungodly amount of antibiotic, and it did not touch him. His throat was oblong. You couldn't tell where his head began and his neck ended. It was really bad. So when I saw that he was not getting better, I took him to Labana Children's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. And so when I took him there, they said, well, we're going to just check him out, see what's going on with him. So I had to go and pick up my husband from work that day. So I said, okay, I'll be back. They admitted him, and I said, I'll be back. Before I could return, they called me and told me that you have to get back here. Something is going on. So when I got back, they told me they were going to send him to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And I'm like, okay. So I, was thinking, okay, well, he's a little sick, but he'll be okay. Went to St. Jude's, and the doctors met us, went in a conference room, and they said they did testing, and my son had leukemia. At that time, I did not know what leukemia was, so they explained it to me. It was a form of cancer, and it was, everyone have leukocytes in their bodies, but when you get leukemia, the leukocytes take over your blood system, and it causes, your blood to go crazy, or that's not what they said. That was what my terminology was, and that he was very, very ill. And so one day my son wants to play football. A few days later, now he has a terminal illness. It was pretty devastating.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine sitting there and being told this news. What was your first response?
Like I was in the twilight zone, that it really wasn't happening. I thought, well, I'm surely going to wake up from this dream, but it wasn't. It wasn't a dream. It was real. My son Tony was such an amazing young man. If he had any concerns, if he was fearful at all, he never let me know. The whole year and a half that he lived after the diagnosis, I never saw fear. I never saw anything to say that, oh, Mom, I'm not concerned about this. I'm okay.
Well, what happened after the initial shock? You're sitting there, you're being told your son has a terminal illness. What happened then?
I cried out to God. I said, God, if you're real, you got to be real now, because I had went through some things previously. I wasn't in church at the time because I had been hurt by the church. So I'm thinking, okay, the church ain't the answer. But my son had a friend in his classroom named Richard Forrest, and he went to his mother and told her name is Janet, that a friend of his was in the hospital, and they said that he was sick and he wasn't going to come back to school. Could we go and pray for him? And his mom said yes, and she she called me and asked me if she could come and visit, and I told her sure. And that's how I got over that initial shock, because someone intervened, a little boy named Richard, 10 years old. His friend, the teachers were told, the teacher told the class that Tony was never coming back to school, more or less, and he was concerned about that. And so when Janet Forrest stepped into my life, and she told me that she cared, and she showed me that she cared, about 3 months later, I started attending church that she had recommended, and that's how I got through that initial time, because someone cared, because someone prayed with me. She didn't try to force anything on me. She told me all churches wasn't alike. It was about Jesus. It wasn't about the building. And I believed her.
Well, why don't you just tell us the story? It's such a beautiful story, and you say it so well. Why don't you tell us the story? Because there were a lot of supernatural things that happened when you walked through this journey of getting the diagnosis, the prognosis, and everything.
Yeah, it was. It was incredible. At that time, like I said, I was not in church. I had gone to church as a teenager, had been really hurt, and so I'm thinking, I don't need that. And so once Janet Forrest came into my life, and Richard, my son's best friend, they started coming to the hospital and visiting, and I thought, thinking, I'm like, okay, Lord, it's maybe there are real Christians. Maybe I did get hurt by a group of people, and it's not about the people, it's about you. And so I started attending church. It was called Free Faith Ministries in Memphis, Tennessee. And I was going to school at the same time, and I was loving on my son. And because prior to that, I was not a very good mom. My husband and I were separated. I had a baby in 1983. Her name is Lori. And in 1984, God began to tug on my heart and tug on my husband's heart for us to get back together. We got back together in 1984 in April of 1984, and my son was diagnosed with leukemia in November of 1984. And I was so glad that I was in Memphis because St. Jude's is an incredible hospital. They took such good care of us. Well, once we found out, I began to just love on my son, and he was loving on me. I got saved, filled with the Holy Ghost, and the Lord began to just let me know that he loved me, that he cared for me, that he cared for my son. I was able to be there for my son. I was able to just love on him, and the doctors at the hospital were so good to him, and they were good to us. So one day I was just kind of tired because I'm still trying to take care of my 3 daughters, and I'm still trying to take care of my husband, and I'm still trying to be there at the hospital with my son. So one day I'm like, God, I really want to go to Florida. And so he said, okay. I was laying on the couch, and I saw this big hand. It was like a glove, and it just zipped heaven open and said, get what you want. And what I wanted was a trip to Florida because that's what my son had asked for. He wanted to see his friends in Florida. And so my husband was working. He got laid off that very day, and God provided money for us to go to Florida. But he told me, he said, don't take nothing that you don't need because when you get there, I'm going to really bless you. And I'm thinking, wow. So I told my husband what he said. I packed a little suitcase for me and the girls and my son, and we went to Florida. While we were there, my son was only 11 by that time. One of the guys that lived across the street from my grandmother had this really nice convertible. I don't remember what kind it was, but it was a nice little sports car, and he actually let my son drive that car. And I'm thinking, wow, that is so incredible. I still have a picture of that. And my brother, whom never gives anybody anything unless he can get something from them, gave us money. People were giving us gifts. We had so much stuff we didn't have room to receive it. And I'm thinking, wow, God, you are just so awesome to bless us like this. But he had told me that he was going to bless us. And sometimes I think back on that time. I'm thinking back when that hand zipped open heaven, could I have asked God to heal Tony and let him stay here? I don't know. Sometimes I think about that, but it's okay because I know Tony is with the Lord, and I know he's well. I know he's not sick anymore. But that often I thought about that later on. I thought, wow, I should have asked God just to heal Tony and let him stay here. But at that time, I wanted what Tony wanted, and that was a trip to Florida. So after that, after we got back from the trip, we were at St. Jude's, and a counselor said that they had a new foundation called Make-A-Wish Foundation, and that they could let Tony wish one of his wishes come true. So I said, okay. So we started the process, and Tony's wish was to go to PTL, Heritage PTL. And they asked him, why would you, if you could go anywhere, why you didn't choose Disney, why you didn't choose other places, why do you want to go to PTL? He said, because he really liked what Jim and Tammy Baker did. They love people and they help people. So they did. They brought a Baker to our house. Tony was into basketball, so Andre Turner was his favorite basketball player that played for Memphis State. So Andre Turner came out and played a little hoop with Tony when we got to St. Jude's, and we had this big mobile home, well, not mobile home, but the one that you can drive. And they had filled it with cameras, and they filled it with food, and they gave us money, and we had the best time. And not only that, they let us go to Carowin Park, which was in North Carolina. While we were at Carowin Park, I was taking pictures. I love to take pictures. And when we got the pictures developed, every single picture of Tony at that park, his back was turned. And I didn't even realize it while I was taking the pictures. It was as if Tony was saying, goodbye, I'll see y'all soon. I'll see you when you get to heaven. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, sisters. He loved his sisters, and they absolutely loved him. So when we got back home and everything was kind of settling down, I began to just talk to the Lord after I saw Tony saying goodbye. So I asked my girlfriend, Jackie, I asked her if she would get the girls so I could spend some quality time with the Lord. And she said, sure. If she would get Tony, she said, sure. So I cried out to God. I said, God, are you going to heal Tony and take him home? Are you going to heal him and leave him here? And he said he was going to heal him and take him home. I said, okay. I said, when are you going to do that? And he told me June the 16th. I said, okay, June the 16th. I said, if that's you, Lord, speaking to me, talk to me in your word. And he took me from the book of Genesis all the way through the Bible. And one of the scriptures that popped out to me was in the book of Isaiah. It says some will be taken out because they wasn't going to be able to withstand what was going to come. And he said there's a time to live and there's a time to die in Ecclesiastes. In the New Testament, he says that precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of a saint. And all this is simultaneously happening. And I was a new Christian at the time. I was a year and a half old in Christ. And he says every hour turned, and it was right there, and it would jump off the page. And one of the ones that really stuck to me is that, oh, death, where's thy sting? Oh, grave, where's thy victory? I'm thinking, wow. And so I told Janet, who was Tony's godmother by then, what God had said, and she didn't want to hear it. And I told my husband, and he said, oh, God didn't tell you that. I said, well, if God didn't tell me that, then it won't happen, so we ain't going to worry about it. But because he did tell me that, I was able to embrace Tony with a new light. I was able to love him and talk to him and just say my goodbyes without saying goodbye. And he was so precious, and it was just incredible. And so that was part of my journey. And so the day that, so we lived and we laughed and we cried. And the Friday before he went to be with Jesus, this had to be the 13th of June. He wanted to play basketball. So we went to the basketball court. Let me back up a little bit. During the time Tony was in the hospital, he needed to get some what do you call it? A spinal tap where they wanted a bone marrow transplant. So they checked people out, and I was the perfect candidate. So I had to give him some platelets, and they had to put it, that was the hardest thing to watch, to see him sit there. I had to hold his hand, and he had to be really still, otherwise he could be paralyzed. But I was singing to him and talking to him and laughing with him. But he was in intensive care one day, and I gave him platelets, and the next day he was out, and on the third day he was going home. That was how God was working in this young man's life. He went back to school. He played basketball for the Little League team in the neighborhood. His Little League team won the championship. That was part of the miracle of all of this happening. When we were in Florida, I remember my sister-in-law being in the kitchen and saying to me, Tony don't look sick. I'm like, well, yeah, he is, but God got him. God has him. And they asked me, how can you be so calm when this is happening? I'm like, well, because, first of all, God has assured me that Tony was just loaned to me, that I had the privilege of helping him to raise Tony. But Tony don't belong to me. He belongs to God. And they like, wow, okay. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. And I remember reading in the Word that he says for us to cry when they come in and rejoice when they leave. So if the Word says it, then I believe it. And so death to me for a saint is not a bad thing. It's actually a graduation. And so everybody looking at me like, yeah, you'll change your mind. You'll change your mind. Wait until he actually die. You will change your mind. I'm thinking, okay, well, we'll see. So all of that happened. So that day on June the 13th when he wanted to play ball, I said, okay. So we went to the basketball court, and he would shoot a few baskets, and he was really good at it. He started playing basketball at the age of 3. He could actually hit from half court at the age of 3. People who knew Tony as a basketball legend at the age of 3. He stayed on the basketball court. He was amazing. He was an amazing young man. So that was on a Friday. That Saturday, we were sitting at home. I don't know where everybody else was, but he was sitting in one chair, and I was sitting in another chair, and he looked at me, and he said, Mom. I said, yeah. He said, what would you do if you woke up and you saw someone dead in your house or sitting here? I said, well, if they didn't know Jesus, I would be sad. But if they knew Jesus, I would be happy because I knew they was in the presence of the Lord. And he had the biggest, most beautiful smile I've ever seen on his face. And I said, okay. So he was preparing. He was saying his goodbyes. That Sunday morning, he said, Mom, I really don't feel like going to church. Could Erica stay home with me? This is his oldest sister, my oldest daughter. She just celebrated her 40th birthday this year, and they were best friends. I said, yeah, she could stay home with you. So we went to church, and we got back, and they had been playing basketball. She had put a basket on the floor and gave him the basketball, and he was shooting the baskets. He was shooting the ball in the clothes basket, and they talked, and they shared their special moments together. So that night, he wanted to go back to church. He said, Mom, could you take me to church tonight? At that time, he had gotten so weak that he could not walk. I said, sure. So I picked him up, and I carried him to the car, and we went to church that night. And the last movie that my son saw was A Hiding Place with Corrie ten Boom. And when it came to the part where Corrie's sister Elizabeth had died and went to heaven, my son smiled. He sat there and he smiled. The Saturday night before that, he was in so much pain. He said, Mom, can you do something? I'm hurting so bad. So I went to St. Jude's and got him some morphine, and I brought it back. And when I got back home, he was asleep, so I didn't want to wake him up. And we had gotten this tape from Dodie Osteen where she had pancreatic cancer and where God had healed her, and he wanted to listen to it over and over and over again on continual play. And so all of these things are happening. So that Sunday night, he wanted to sleep with me and listen to that tape. He had an appointment for June the 16th to go to the doctor. So all night long he was up. He couldn't sleep. He began to throw up blood, and I was holding him in my arms and loving on him. And so when my husband got off work 6 o'clock that morning, I said, we need to take Tony to the doctor now. I know he has an appointment today, but we need to go now. So we went to the hospital. When we got to the emergency room at St. Jude's, he asked me, he said, Mom, can you get me a stretcher? Because these hospital beds are really hard, and I don't want to be on this hard bed. I said, okay, yeah, we could do that. And so we went in this little examining room, and I remember Dr. Cho coming in. And he looked at me, and he said, I don't want to give Tony any blood. He needs blood, but I don't want to give him any because I don't want to prolong the agony. He's gonna die soon. I said, yeah, I know. He said, what do you mean you know? I said, he's gonna die today. He's gonna go to heaven today. He said, how do you know? I said, because God told me. And he looked at me like, yeah, right, okay. So I had been up all night. Tony had been up all night. So right before he went into a coma, he said, Mom, I love you so much. I said, oh, babe. No, I told him I loved him first. He said, I know you love me, Mom. And that meant a lot because before we had come back to Memphis, I wasn't a good mom. I was not a very good mom. I would come and go. I would leave him. I would leave him with my grandmother. I was searching for love. I was doing all these crazy things and leaving my kids behind while I go and try to find them a dad or try to find this or that. And even one time Tony was in the hospital, I got him out. He had asthma. I got him out of the hospital, took him home. A day later, I'm gone. That kind of mom, that's the kind of mom I was. But when he told me that he knew that I love him, it healed a part of me that I had shame and regret about. But when he said those words, it was such a joy to hear that from my son, to say, Mom, I know that you love me. So that day, Janet came to the hospital, and she stayed with me all day. And she would pray for Tony. Every time she would pray, he would turn his head. Even though he was in a coma, he wasn't talking no more. He would turn his head. And she said, Rosilyn, you see that? Every time I pray for Tony, he turns his head. I say, yes, Janet, because you're praying for him and you're keeping him here, and he wants to go home. And she said, okay. So she took me home that day so I could shower and get refreshed and come back. While she was home and I was home, she called me up and she apologized. She said, I'm so sorry. I said, why are you sorry? She said, the Lord reminded me of a time when there was a gentleman in our church that was wanting to go home, and we prayed and he couldn't go home until we released him to go. I said, okay. She said, I'm going to release Tony. I said, okay, thank you. And so we went back to the hospital. When we went back to the hospital, the Dr. Cho, met me. He said, Tony died today, and he was clinically dead, but he came back to say goodbye to you. I said, oh, thank you, doctor. So we went back in his room, and at that time they let all of us, me, my husband, my children, Janet, and some other members from the church, my pastor, his wife, and Sister Evelyn, they let her come in, all of us come into his room. And we were just talking, and Tony, there was 2 tears. They looked like big teardrops that you can see through, like raindrops that you could see through, that was rolling down his cheeks. And the Lord ministered to me and said, those tears are not for Tony, but those tears are for you, because Tony know how much you're going to miss him. I said, wow, okay. And I just loved on him and thanked him for coming back to say goodbye. And then we started singing this beautiful song, We'll walk in the light, beautiful light, down where the dewdrops of mercy shines bright, shined all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world. And when we got to the part, hark the herald angel sings, Jesus, the light of the world. The angels came, the room lit up. It was so bright and so beautiful. And the angels came and escorted Tony in the presence of God. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. And that's when Tony breathed his last breath. It wasn't this long, drawn-out thing. He just fell asleep and woke up again in the presence of God because he had already been there. But he came back to say, I'll see you later, Mom. I'll be praying for you, Mom. You can do this thing, Mom. I know you want to leave with me, Mom, but stay here because you got work to do. And he left. He went to be with Jesus. He went to be with Jesus in heaven. And so after he went to be with Jesus, I walked, and I had called his dad earlier and told him, if you want to see Tony alive again, if you want to see Tony on this side of heaven, you need to come. And he said, okay. But he didn't come that day. He thought he had time. So I called him. And on my way to call him, one of the other gentlemen that sung, that son had been sick. His name was Kurt. He said, how's Tony doing? I say, he's fine. He's in heaven now. And that guy, like, well, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, I'm going to call his dad and tell him. And that witness so to that guy, if he didn't get saved that night, I'm sure he did get saved because he saw the glory of God. And so we had Tony a memorial in Memphis, and they retired his basketball jersey that day. And the hospital actually paid, because we didn't have any insurance, they paid for his body, the temple that he lived in, to be flown to Jacksonville because I wanted to go home to Jacksonville where Tony Friends was to put his body away. So while we were in Jacksonville, we went to Perry first, and we were driving, and the Lord said, pray in the Spirit. So I began to pray. I began to pray in the Spirit the whole time on our way. When I got there, my aunt was so mean that day. She said a few choice words to me. You should have had some insurance and da-da-da-da-da. In the meantime, she was writing out a check to pay for his services. And so I took the check to the guy where the body had been sent. I didn't even know where the body was sent. I had no idea. God set all that up. So I went to the place, to the funeral home. And I gave the guy the check, and he looked at it like, what is this? You know, it was like a long time ago. So it wasn't as expensive as it is now, but I think my aunt maybe gave me like $1,500. And that guy said, you know what? I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to give you the best that we have here for this amount. You owe me nothing else. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. Even when Tony passed, there was an anointing on his house that he lived in. His hair was full of curls. He used to have nappy hair like his mom. But when his hair grew back, it was big locks of curls. It was as God was saying, here, Tony, I know you've been going through a lot, but let me bless you with some beautiful hair. And everybody was asking me, did you get Tony a curl? I'm like, no, God did. God gave him curls. You know, they were silky, beautiful curls. And so while we were at Heritage PTL, they had given us clothes. They rolled out the red carpet. We went up into the prayer tower. People were giving us $100 bills and $50 bills and just blessing us. And we would go to a store, and we didn't even have to pay any money. All the money that Make-A-Wish had given us, we didn't even have to spend it because people gave us money while we were there. And it was just an incredible venture. It was so amazing what God was doing this whole episode, this year and a half of when Tony was diagnosed and until he went to heaven. So at his services that morning, that Saturday morning, when we had buried him a week later, they had said that it was raining. It was raining so bad. And I looked up. I said, well, someone said it's raining. I wish it was. I said, I know it's not going to rain when we put Tony away. No way. And we had his services at 11 a.m. The sun was shining. The grounds was dry. It was just a beautiful time. So at his homegoing, I did his services. I spoke. And I told all the young people that were there, because Tony was almost 12. He would have been 12 on July 21st. And I told the young people, I'm like, Tony is in heaven. This is the house that he used to live in. He is in his mansion now with the Lord. He's playing basketball. If there's a basketball court in heaven, that's where Tony is. And so, I gave a altar call. I'm like, if you don't know Jesus, it's time to get to know him so you could see Tony again one day. It was just beautiful. We took him, out and we put his body, the body that he lived in the ground, and we came home and we rejoiced. At least I was rejoicing. Others were crying. Of course you cry because you miss him. I still cry because I miss him, but I know where he is and I know I'll see him again. But my girlfriend, 2 years later, one of my son's best friend, Derek, was shot down and killed. And my girlfriend told me, because I gave invitation for Derek to receive Christ, she know her son was in heaven because he received Christ because of that. Wow. I'm thinking, wow, God, you are so incredible. You are so wonderful. And so he will be 40. If Tony still was around, his 40th birthday will be next year, June the 21st. And because I didn't have the money at that time, I never got him a headstone, and that kind of bothered my middle daughter. So I'm gonna do that next year. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna get him one for her, because I know Tony is not there. Tony is in heaven, but I'm gonna get him a marker for his grave. Well, he has a marker, but he don't have a headstone. But I'm going to get him one next year for his 40th birthday, if he had still been on earth. But his real birthday is June the 16th, when he went to his heavenly home, to his eternal home. So that's my story.
Goodness, that's an amazing story. And as you talked, what comes to me, because we've all lost people. I know it's different when you lose a child. But I tell you one thing, being a Christian, it surely does help, because we have that blessed assurance, that promise that we'll see our loved ones again if they died as a Christian. And that is so, you just can't even put a price on that at all. And listening to the validation he gave you to help you heal. You had this stigma that you were a horrible mother. And I think as moms, we look at the things we've done wrong because we're human and we don't always do things right. But to hear that from your child, what healing validation. That was another huge gift he gave you.
Yeah, that was a huge gift. And let me tell you something else that happened. Because I knew that God had spoke to me, and I had no doubt that God had spoke to me that Tony was going home on June the 16th. And I told the doctor. The doctor wrote me a letter. And he told me that remember I told you that Tony was turning his head whenever Janet would pray for him? He got this big knot upside his head because he was in a semi-coma, and he had no platelets in his body, no white blood cells to heal, your body, so any kind of obstruction, any kind of bruising, it don't heal. So he had this big knot upside his head just that quick. And he also had a scratch. He scratched himself on a piece of wire. We used to have an old-fashioned antenna on the TVs, and he scratched himself on that, and it left this huge place on his leg. Well, that night, before he went to heaven, it was healed. He had no knot on his head. He had no scar. But to validate all of that, the doctor asked me if he could do an autopsy on Tony's body. And I'm like, sure, you can. He sent me a letter and said none of Tony's internal organs were affected. None.
Goodness.
And that's impossible because when you do chemo, you kill everything in the body.
Goodness.
And back 27 years ago, chemo was a whole lot harsher than it is now.
Sure. Well,
and another miracle, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Another miracle is that Tony did not look sick because God's grace was on him, and he grew up, and I saw him like he would look as a young man. When he got sick, he wore a size 10. A year and a half later, he was in a size 18, but not because he was blowed up and swollen like some of the kids may be because of the medication, because he got taller and he was a young man. It was amazing.
It sounds amazing.
Yes, it was. And Tony, whenever Tony was able to get out of bed and go places and do things, you know what he did? He went to other kids' room and ministered to them and took them toys. There was this little boy on the same floor as Tony that never had any visitors. I saw his mom one time in the year and a half that I was at St. Jude's. The nurses used to go in and hug on the baby and love on him. But it was so much rejection. The baby was so sad. His eyes were so sad because he had no visitors. Tony used to go and visit him and take him toys. It was amazing what God.
Special.
Yes,
that is
yes.
Special.
But I still have that letter. That the doctor wrote to me, that none of Tony's internal organs were affected, but they were healed like new.
One of those medical myths, huh?
Yes.
Mysteries.
Miracle.
Mysteries. Yes.
Yes.
And he died on June 16th, which would have been Father's Day.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It was a day.
What a homecoming for our Father in heaven.
Yes. It was actually the day after because he went home on a Monday. Because we went to church that Sunday, and he went home that Monday. And one of the things that bears saying is that my husband wanted so badly for that not to be true because he loved Tony. He wanted Tony to live and not die. And it was 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before 12. That would have made it October 17th. But Tony went home 11:45
that night.
p.m. Yes.
Now, when you were talking about that, he had been clinically dead, but then he came back. How long was he recorded or documented to be dead?
8 minutes.
My goodness.
The doctor said he was gone. 8 minutes. Yes.
That is spectacular.
Yes, and the doctor said he came back to say goodbye. And I told him I had no doubt that it would happen like that. because I was so tired. I had been up all that Sunday. Well, actually, that Saturday night, I stayed up praying all that Saturday night. That Sunday, we went to church, and then he couldn't sleep because he was, in that dying mode, that Sunday night leading to that Monday morning. And so neither one of us slept, between listening to the testimony by Dodie Osteen and how God had healed her, and he wanted to listen to that. And then that day I was up all day, and, I was just exhausted. So I went home and took a shower. That next day I went to get my hair done. I remember sitting there to get my hair done and being in a daze and still in that, shock of that, okay, he's gone now, and, I'm going to miss him. And, one of the things that I think was the hardest for me, not that he was in heaven, but that he was the only man that ever loved me, and that was hard because he used to take care of me. He'd say, Mom, you need anything? And he was a little hustler. He would go out and cut yards, or he would go to the store for the people in the neighborhood, or he would rake their yards and make money and say, okay, Mom, I got some money. What do you need? Even at a young age. And that's what, and that's what was hard for me. And I asked God, I'm like, God, why would you take the only man that ever loved me out of my life? So it's not like I didn't go through anything. That was what I went through. That was the hardest for me. Not that he was gone, but that he was the only man that loved me with a pure love. And they didn't want something from me, but they actually gave to me. Because my dad, he didn't give to me. He didn't take care of me. When I was little, I think he may have given me $20, maybe 10 times maybe. That was it. He didn't pay child support. He didn't ask me, if you needed anything. And, so to me, that hurt me the most, was that the only man that I knew on this side of heaven that loved me, the physical man that I could touch and see, was taken away from me, and that was the hardest thing for me. And I still cry about that because, if Tony was here, he would protect me, and he would take care of me. It's just something different about boys and girls. My girls love me, and but it's just a different relationship, and I know that if I had a need, that my son would meet that need, and I know my son would protect me and love me, and he wouldn't let people hurt me. And so that's the hardest thing for me. Even now, it's hard. But God takes care of me. He protects me. He loves me. But that's still hard for me.
Sure. When you talked about him passing and the angels, did you see the angels? You said it got really bright in there.
I saw the angels. I saw the angels escorting him into heaven. Yeah, I saw angels. It was so beautiful. It was like the room lit up, and it was like we were in a hospital room, but it was like we wasn't there anymore. The sky, I could see the sky. I could see him leaving the room and going through, and the sky opened up, and the angels was escorting him into the presence of God. Yeah, I did.
Goodness, how beautiful.
Yeah, it was. It was beautiful, and that's why I was able to talk to talk to the people that came to his homegoing and let them know that it's okay to cry, it's okay to miss him, because Tony was a clown of the party. He could make you laugh. I remember he would always say, this one lady would say, little boy, would you come and go to the store for me? And he thought that was so funny. And he came home. He said, Mom, the lady down the street said, little boy, would you come and go to the store for me? And everybody would laugh. It was just the way he would say it, you know. And he was just loving and kind, and he was a little boy. He had his little boy issues, but he loved God.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just what it sounds like all through, his love for God.
Yeah. Yes.
And that relationship.
One thing he did. One time I overheard him. We had gone to a park in Memphis. They don't have it anymore. They closed it down. But it was a park that we went to, and we took a little girl, one of my daughter's classmates, with us. And so I overheard him talking on the phone to one of his friends. And he said something, you know, that was very negative. And when I talked to him about that, I said, sweetheart, I said, you know that didn't happen. I said, you are a young man. You are a man of God. And you can't say things like that. And he wept, and he called his friend, and he apologized for lying. Yeah, so he grew up a lot in that year and a half. In fact, that was one of the things that the doctor said that would happen, that, you know, kids with terminal illnesses, they mature very fast. But he said not to baby him, but to love him and to still discipline him. And I have to say this. I remember Tony had did something. He defied what I had said. And so I spanked him. I gave him like 3 or 4 licks on his butt. You know, he had a pretty big butt. So it didn't hurt him, you know, spare the rod, spoil the child. And I remember my husband reported me to the counselor at the hospital. And I remember one day I was sitting in class. I was going to college, to the business college in Memphis. And I remember the Lord told me, get up and go home. And I was obedient. I told my professor, I said, I was in the English class. I said, I have to go home. She said, why? I said, well, my son, he's a patient at St. Jude's, and I just need to go home. She said, you don't act like you have a son with that has a illness. I said, well, how am I supposed to be acting? I mean, I'm in school. When I'm in school, I act like I'm in school or whatever. So I got up to leave, and I went home. And when I went home, there was a caseworker from HRS, from Memphis, whatever Memphis calls it. And I walked in. I said, well, what's going on? Because my husband didn't even tell me that he had did that. And she said, well, I had a report that you abused your child. I said, really? I said, oh, okay. And so she said, but I'm looking at him, and I'm talking to him, and I don't see anything, but we still had to check it out. I said, okay. So anyway, we went, and she did her investigation, and she found it, you know, non-sufficient. So she dropped it. Had I not went home that day when the Holy Spirit told me to, what could have happened to me? You know, and that hurt so bad that my husband would do that.
Were you two separated at the time?
No, we were married. We were living in the same house. No. Yes, I know.
Goodness.
And yeah, so that, you know, that was, you know, so we have to be very, very, when you're going through a traumatic time like that, everybody is sensitive. You know, the whole family is going through, not just one person, the whole family is.
Sure.
And for that to have happened, it woke me up. It's like, wow. But it was dropped. It was dropped, and the person that was there was a spirit-filled, born-again Christian, but at the same time, she still had to do her job.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yes, she did.
And you know, my son didn't even know that my husband had called But that day, he kept my son home from school. And the Lord told me to go home. And I did. I was obedient. So if the Lord tell you to do something, if that voice on the inside is something out of the norm, say go home. Don't delay. Go home. Whatever it is, not just about this, about anything. Be obedient to the Spirit of God.
Even if it sounds silly, right?
Even if it sounds silly. Even if it sounds silly. Yes.
Well, we have to start wrapping it up, and I wanted to give you anything you have, any last-minute thoughts, anything you have to say before we start getting ready to sign off.
Yeah. Just that we have to remember what the Word says. I know it sounds funny. I know it's against the grain, but the Word do say to rejoice when they leave this earth and to cry when they come in. And that children belong to God. They are a gift for us. He allows us to be a part of their growing and their learning and a part of our life. But when we make children our gods, or, when children these are mine, we have to be careful about that, because if something happened, and things do happen, children die every day. Some die before they even come to this earth, stillborn, or, some die, what they call crib death. Just remember that they are with the Lord. And if you don't know Jesus, please know Jesus so you can sit and see him again one day. Because I have no doubt, just like David said, when his son was sick, he cried, he prayed, he fasted, he tore his clothes. And when they told him, the servants was murmuring with each other, was talking. They didn't want to tell him. They're like, well, if he acting like this and his son ain't even dead, how's he going to act when we tell him he died? When they told David that his son had died, David got up, he cleaned himself up, and he ate. And he said, he can't come to me, but I can go to him. And that, even David, even before he read the scriptures like we have now, even before he knew to be absent from the body is to be present with God, he knew that the God he served was a good God and that he would be with him. And that's where his son was. So that's what I want to leave you with.
Thank you so much, Rosilyn. I mean, what courage.
You're welcome.
What courage, inspiration to know that, this isn't the end. It isn't the end. God's got it all. He's got these children in his hand. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Such an inspiration. And I thank everybody for tuning in and listening. I pray that this really gave you hope and inspiration as well in whatever you're facing. Tune in next week. Until then, have a blessed week, and we'll see you. We'll talk to you at that time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's broadcast of God, Where Were You When? We can be found on Facebook and at www.smallvoicessilenced.com. You can also find show archives at blogtalkradio.com/Truth Network or /Christian Freedom under subtitles God, Where Were You When? And Wednesday Power Morning. Have a blessed week, and we look forward to talking with you again next Wednesday morning at 9 Eastern Standard Time.